Oh yeah, I got the perfect song for the kids to sing. And all my people that...
To fully understand my perspective of this review, I feel like it's important to go over the everyday constructs shown in modern-day media. These basic concepts of character development and storytelling being hammered into our brain as far back as elementary school. What happens if a piece of media happens to challenge these concepts, these ideals? It's important to note this isn't the fault of any particular artist. It makes sense Hollywood would want to work with this. At the end of the day, their main goal is to make money. It is a corporation. It makes sense not to put that much money in a concept that some people may view as polarizing. Even with the rise of internet storytelling, and I want to say 2010, these basic concepts have been so hammered into our brain, it makes sense a lot of internet stories will follow this same construct. To really analyze this piece of artwork, you have to realize these constructs don't really exist through the show. They've been kind of altered and remixed into a way that almost feels jarring, but in kind of an unique way, something I'd never see again. This project is very interesting to me, and I have a lot to say about it. One particular scene I want to bring up before I actually start the retrospective or review is in the first episode when Brandon directly mentions he suffers with schizophrenia. This scene made me physically gasp, but I don't really know why. I have a base understanding of how schizophrenia works. I understand media portrays mental illness in not the most correct way, often over-exaggerating traits to make them seem more scary than what they actually are. This scene unintentionally challenges media in itself. My reaction was based on this romanticized schizophrenia you see in your average film. This piece of dialogue not only challenging media in its broad depiction of mental illness, but the viewer itself.
Hey there everyone, my name's Brandon Hagwith. I love delicious food, I love playing video games. Today, I'm going to tell you all the story of how my life changed forever.
Queen.
When I was a younger kid, I want to say around 9 years old, I have a specific memory of me and my little sister coming home from after hanging out with the neighbor all day. I turned on my Nintendo Wii as me and her watched the Equestria Girls' My Little Pony special. Thinking back to this still gives me a feeling of nostalgia, a feeling of comfort almost. It takes me back to a time when things were simpler. Why might I bring this up, you may ask? Well, I believe nostalgia is based on the philosophy that people have that make it easier for us to tend to enjoy stories with characters we can often relate to or have a sense of familiarity with. I believe Brandon as a character is meant to encapsulate this feeling, as I believe Brandon is meant to be a character that represents not Brandon, but the viewer themselves.
Queen.
The introduction to most stories is meant to normally introduce the protagonist or character we follow throughout the story to the audience, as to give the audience a level of understanding of the character or their goals. However, Brony at Canterlot High takes a very interesting approach to this. Rather than directly introducing us to Brandon, aka the protagonist we follow throughout the story, we're rather introduced to his environment, the narrator describing relatively arbitrary detail about the place. I believe intentionally added to give the audience a level of familiarity as to help the viewer see themselves as Brandon, before directly cutting to a scene of Brandon simply in his room watching television. The scene purposely going on for an extended amount of time to give the audience a feeling of normality, directly contrasting what's about to happen.
Wormhole in space controlled by man. So, according to Hawking, a wormhole may be able to provide a shortcut for jumping between two distant regions of space-time.
The concept of dimensional travel sounds completely fictional to a majority of people. However, many constructs that build up the theory of dimensional travel are completely true. This concept of dimensional travel that almost seems impossible, or false at that, to some people, are completely true to others. I use time travel as an example as a bridge, kind of. What level of understanding or believing in a construct makes you insane? Many people define insanity as a level of not understanding what is real and what is not, which is why a lot of people who believe in such popular conspiracy theories are often described as going through manic episodes. You may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with Brandon? Well, we only really got one characteristic about Brandon. and that's the fact he likes My Little Pony. As previously mentioned, the video openly starts off with giving us a sense of familiarity with the place, everything to a very normal town, to a normal setup, just to be randomly contrasted by this seemingly impossible thing. That's what Equestria Girls takes the role of here. It's something that us, as the viewer, presuming we are a fan of the show My Little Pony, have a level of familiarity with, a level of comfort. How big of a fan or how much comfort can we really take into a series before we're considered obsessed? The reason I previously mentioned I believe Brandon works as a stand-in for the viewer themselves. This level of comfort he takes into the series, causing him to make rash decisions with a lack of thoughts. Brandon is presented with a character of Sunset Shimmer, a character he feels a level of comfort with, a level of desire toward. This overwhelming feeling of desire completely tearing down a level of familiarity that the show has been trying to build with you, as Brandon decides to go through the portal.
Yeezy season approaching, whatever y'all been hearing, whatever y'all been...
This new chapter begins with Brandon, as he takes in the scenery, seemingly overjoyed.
Well, damn, this blows.
And he fell through the roof.
After Brandon crash lands into Sunset Shimmer's house, the two begin to talk as Shimmer feels bad for Brandon, before revealing the fact why Sunset Shimmer even was in Brandon's initial dimension. Shimmer had found an old VHS that allowed her to change dimensions. One notable scene I want to bring up again is something that almost mirrors the extended scene of Brandon just watching television, shown at the beginning of the episode. And that is a scene of Brandon just walking up the stairs to get some Adderall. This scene almost trying to replicate the feeling of familiarity with Brandon's house as shown in the earlier scene. This scene I feel like tries to encapsulate Brandon's feelings as a character. Brandon is a character who takes comfort within this show. To show this almost normalized situation happening also provides the viewer with a level of understanding of this universe is relatively normal compared to Brandon's universe. This level of normalcy that's trying to be established is carried throughout the plot, as despite the dire situation of literal dimensional travel and, the roof being caved in, the two seem to hit it off relatively well, as Sunset even allows him to stay the night at her place. This shockingly normal conversation has been set up through this feeling of normalcy shown despite all the crazy things happening. As the next day rolls around, we're introduced to a character named Lightning Star. Lightning Star acts as a motherly role to Brandon, acting more as a guide than anything, allowing him to get into school as he is basically lost in the world. Now, I should probably mention something by now that's abundantly clear about Brandon's character. The dude's kind of a dork. His kind of charming and somewhat awkward demeanor often acts as the comedy in this series, which is kind of why the dynamic of him and Sunset works so well, as Sunset is a much more out there character who tends to be a tad bit more aggressive. But this also raises the question, why does Brandon choose to be in this dimension so fast? Because it went out of its way to kind of display how similar the dimensions are. I feel like the possible future world building could be a lot more interesting. What are so different about these dimensions? Is it how people act, school systems, politics?
George Bush doesn't care about black
I
people.
don't know, just general things. I have a lot of questions that I feel like would really be fun to answer in the future. I want to see the world building of this series. It gives us enough questions but enough answers to give the viewer a feeling of wanting more almost. The episode is basically at its end at this point, as Brandon and his adopted mother hug, discussing the future of him going to school. My final thoughts on this episode is I overall really enjoyed it. It's a very unique story with a lot of its messages and characters. I made sure to leave out a few details, as so somebody who watches this can still go back and rewatch Brandon's video. But overall, I appreciate the series for being so unique. From its messaging to its characters, I don't really think I've seen anything like this before. Overall, if you're bored, I definitely recommend watching it. Even if there are some scenes that are a little corny, it's still made up by its charm. It's a very charming series, even if you don't necessarily agree with my opinions on it. Overall, I enjoy it. and I really can't wait to discuss a lot of the future plot points and how it takes the characters or world building. But yeah, thank you for watching. If this video goes over well, I'm probably going to make more and more parts going on through the whole series, as I know Season 2 is about to be released soon. And with that, I say good night, Ponyville.